They say a mother always knows when a line is crossed, but what if that line was never meant to be drawn in the first place? I used to believe I understood the boundaries in life, what's right, what's wrong, what love should look like, especially between a mother and her child. But there are some moments in life that don't fit neatly into any category. Moments that feel like dreams when they happen, and nightmares once they're over. It's been 2 years now. 2 years since that night. I still remember every single detail, how the rain gently tapped against the window pane, how the house was quiet, too quiet, how I felt that strange kind of stillness you only notice when something inside you starts to shift. I was sitting alone on the couch, wrapped in an old knit blanket. You know the kind, warm but a little worn out. Just like me. A candle flickered on the coffee table, and the TV was on, playing some old romance film I'd seen a dozen times before. I wasn't really watching it though. I was drifting, in my own thoughts, about how life got so lonely. So small. I picked up a photo from the side table, one of those cheesy family portraits from years ago. The kind where everyone's trying to smile, but there's too much distance between them for it to look real. There he was. Ethan. My boy. My only child. The one person in the world who still called me Mom, like it meant something. He had that same sweet smile in the photo he always had growing up, the one that could melt my frustration in an instant. But that night, he wasn't smiling. He wasn't a boy anymore. And I wasn't just his mother. That night, he came to me, not as my son, but as something else entirely. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about motherhood, about love, about myself, began to crumble. It's hard to admit this. Harder still to speak it out loud. But some stories, no matter how uncomfortable, need to be told. Because silence? Silence has a weight. And I've carried it alone for too long. If you've ever found yourself trapped between what's right and what you need, if you've ever stared at someone you love and felt something you weren't supposed to feel, then you already know. This story isn't easy, but it's real. And it changed everything. So if you're ready, if you're really ready to hear it, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, where we unravel stories buried in silence. You won't want to miss what happens next. After that night, I found myself replaying everything in my head, not just the moment itself, but how we even got there. Because it didn't start with something scandalous. No, it started with loneliness. I'm 43 now, divorced, emotionally drained, if I'm being honest. It's not that I didn't try to hold the family together. I did, for years. But my husband, Michael, he left 3 years ago. Just packed up and walked out like all those birthdays, all those arguments, all those moments we shared as a family were nothing but static in his rearview mirror. And after he left, I didn't date. I didn't even try. I told myself it was for Ethan. That he needed stability, not a revolving door of strangers pretending to care. But deep down, if I'm really honest, I think I was just scared. Scared of being touched again. Scared of being seen. Because after Michael, I didn't feel like a woman anymore. I felt like a ghost wrapped in motherhood. Ethan became my anchor. He was 17 when Michael left. Old enough to understand, but still young enough to need me. And I clung to that, maybe too tightly. We leaned on each other. More than we should have, maybe. He'd check in on me when he got home from school. Sit beside me at dinner even when he had homework. He noticed the little things, if I was tired, if I hadn't eaten, if my eyes looked sadder than usual. It's funny. After Michael, I thought I was done being someone's everything. But then Ethan stepped in, not just as my son, but as my companion. My comfort. And as the years passed, he changed. Ethan became a man, quiet, gentle, but so present. He wasn't like the other boys his age. He was mature. Thoughtful, sensitive. Sometimes he'd help me do the dishes, his hands brushing mine, and he'd smile, not like a boy smiling at his mom, but like a man seeing someone he cared about deeply. And I noticed. God help me, I noticed. I tried to ignore it. Tried to brush it off as me overthinking, or maybe just craving connection in a world where I felt so invisible. But in the quiet of our little home, This small, dimly lit house where every creak in the floorboards could be heard, and every sigh echoed. It was impossible to ignore how much we depended on each other. Our home was cozy, yes, but it held a heaviness too. The kind that settles in after too many years of secrets and silence. There were picture frames on the walls, but most of them were from years ago, before the divorce. Before everything fell apart. The curtains stayed drawn more often than not, and the air smelled faintly of vanilla candles and old memories. I'd sit by the window sometimes, watching neighbors walk by, couples holding hands, laughing, living. And I'd wonder, did they know how lucky they were to be seen? Because me? I felt like a shadow in my own life. Ethan would walk into the room and smile at me, and for a second, just a second, I'd forget that I wasn't supposed to need him like that. I'd forget I was his mother and not a woman starving for closeness. And it's not that anything happened. Not yet. But the energy changed. There were longer hugs, softer looks, unspoken things that lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. And every time I looked into his eyes, I saw something I didn't want to admit was there. Something unspoken. Something dangerous. But I didn't say anything. I didn't stop it. Because it felt good. It felt like being wanted again. And for someone who had spent years watching herself disappear into motherhood and routine, that feeling was addictive. I always believed I raised Ethan right. But that night showed me just how complicated right and wrong could become. And once you cross that line, whether you meant to or not, you don't just lose control. You lose yourself. It was a Saturday evening. One of those long, lazy weekends where time slows down just enough for the silence to creep in. Outside, rain pattered gently against the windows. Not a storm, just that steady kind of drizzle that makes you want to curl up with something or someone warm. The house felt especially quiet that night. No phone calls, no dishes in the sink, no emails left to check. Just me and Ethan, curled up on the couch. A familiar routine. An old romantic drama played on the TV. One of those classic films where love blooms slowly, tenderly, over glances and silences instead of text messages and hashtags. The kind of movie I used to dream about living in. Before reality taught me otherwise. We'd seen it before. But something about the way he sat closer this time, the way his arm brushed mine every now and then, felt different. Not intentional, not inappropriate, just charged. I told myself I was imagining things. That the flutter in my chest was just nostalgia mixed with a bit too much wine. When the credits rolled and the music faded out, I reached for the remote, but he beat me to it, clicking the screen off, plunging the room into a dim hush. Then he turned to me. And in that pause, before he even said a word, my breath caught. Because his eyes, they weren't just looking at me. They were searching. He hesitated. Rubbed his palms against his jeans like he was trying to wipe off a thought he didn't know how to hold. And then, softly, almost afraid of the sound of his own voice, he said, "Mom, can I ask you something personal?" I smiled, trying to keep it light. "Of course, baby. What's on your mind?" He looked down, then back up at me. And the way he looked at me right then. Gentle, vulnerable, like he was about to hand me a piece of himself, I'll never forget it. "Do you remember your first time?" He asked it quietly, carefully, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to want the answer. I blinked. Not because I was shocked by the question. Ethan and I always had an open line of communication, but because of how he asked it. There wasn't a smirk. No teasing. He wasn't trying to make a joke. He was genuinely curious. And nervous. I laughed. Softly. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. Yeah, I said. Of course I remember. It was awkward. A little scary. I was young and unsure. And honestly, it wasn't that great. He chuckled, but it was short-lived. Then came the second wave, his voice even softer this time. "There's this girl. I think I like her. We've been texting for a while. But I've never, I don't want to mess it up." I smiled, relieved for a moment. This was safe territory. Sweet. Honest. The kind of mother-son talk I always hoped we'd have when he was little. So I sat up straighter, nodded encouragingly. Well, it's okay to be nervous, I said. The first time is supposed to feel scary. You just have to be gentle. Pay attention. Don't rush. Just be real. I went on for a few minutes, giving what I thought were motherly pearls of wisdom. Keep it respectful. Make sure she's ready too. Don't just think about yourself. You know, the usual. But he wasn't listening like a teenager getting advice. He was watching me. His eyes didn't waver. His hands didn't fidget. He was locked in on my face like he was trying to memorize every word, every breath. And then he said something that made my stomach twist. But what if the person I trust the most isn't her? I blinked. What do you mean? He paused. Then, after what felt like a year of silence, he whispered, what if the person I feel closest to is you? The air in the room changed. No thunder outside, no dramatic music, just stillness. Like the world was holding its breath. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat was dry. My heart pounded. Was this just a slip? A sweet sentiment from a boy who adored his mom too much? Or was it something else? I tried to steer it back. You mean, you feel safe talking to me, right? I asked gently, almost pleading with him to say yes. To give me something safe to hold on to. He nodded. But then his eyes did that thing again, that searching gaze. And I realized he wasn't just nervous about the act. He was nervous about who he wanted it with. And that girl he mentioned? She didn't exist. At least not in the way I first thought. Because it wasn't the girl he was nervous about. It was something else. Something far more complicated. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, my eyes open wide, staring at the ceiling like it held the answers to questions I wasn't brave enough to ask. The house was still, too still. I could hear the wind brushing against the window glass, the soft rustle of trees, the distant hum of passing cars. And every few seconds, I could hear Ethan's bedroom door creak slightly as the draft moved through the hallway. It was like the house itself was whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. But it wasn't the sounds that kept me awake. It was him. His voice. His words. The way he looked at me. Like I was more than his mother. Like I was the answer to something he hadn't dared to ask out loud until now. What if the person I feel closest to is you? God. Those words kept spinning in my head like a haunting lullaby. I pulled the blanket tighter around me. It didn't help. I felt exposed, raw, confused. Not just about him, but about me. Because somewhere, buried deep beneath the shock and disbelief, there was something else. Something darker. Something I didn't want to admit. It had been years since anyone looked at me that way. Years since I felt seen. Wanted. Desired. Not just as a mother, not as someone holding everything together. But as a woman. Michael hadn't touched me for a long time, even before he left. We were roommates by the end, co-parents. Two ghosts circling the same dead marriage. And after he walked out, I stopped seeing myself that way altogether. I became Ethan's everything. His support system, his shoulder to cry on. And somewhere along the way, I buried my own needs. My own desires. But that night on that couch, Ethan didn't see a tired, middle-aged woman just trying to get by. He saw me. And worse? I saw him too. Not as my child, but as a man. I hated myself for even thinking it. He's confused, I whispered into the dark, trying to convince the silence. He's still a child, isn't he? But the way he looked at me, the calm in his voice, the certainty in his eyes. He wasn't confused. I was. And then my mind drifted. Back to a moment I had long tucked away. A memory that should have felt innocent, but now felt like a seed planted long before either of us realized. It was right after the divorce. I was crying in the kitchen, thinking Ethan had gone to bed. But he came downstairs. No words, just walked up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. And in the softest voice, he whispered, "You're the only woman I need, Mom." I remember how that moment had warmed me back then, how it felt like the only thread keeping me from unraveling completely. But now it felt like a thread I should have pulled loose before it knotted itself around both our hearts. I turned over in bed, pressing my face into the pillow, willing the tears not to come. How could I feel this? How could I even entertain the idea? He was my son. But also, he wasn't a little boy anymore. He was grown. He had his own thoughts, his own desires. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one feeling this strange, unspeakable shift. I didn't touch him. I didn't say anything back. But I also didn't shut the door. I didn't tell him he was wrong. I didn't scold him. I just sat there, frozen, letting his words hang in the air like a forbidden perfume I couldn't stop inhaling. And isn't that the danger? Not the act, not the moment itself, but the silence after. The pause that lets possibility slip in like water through a crack in the wall. Because I should have ended it. I should have drawn the line right there. But I didn't. And deep down, I think I know why. I was curious. Curious about how far he'd go. Curious about how much I mattered to him. Curious about how it would feel to be loved like that again. I didn't ask for this. But I didn't stop it either. And the scariest part? A part of me didn't want to. It should have ended with that conversation. But curiosity and silence, they're dangerous companions. They tiptoe through your thoughts in the middle of the night and make space where no space should ever exist. And once the door is open, even just a crack, there's no telling what might slip through. The days that followed felt like walking across a frozen lake. The surface looked solid. Normal, even. But every step carried the threat of something cracking underneath. Nothing had technically changed between us. We still had breakfast together. Still shared our evening routine. Still talked about the news, laughed at our favorite shows, bickered about whose turn it was to take out the trash. But underneath the familiar rhythm, something was different. Unspoken, yet unmistakable. Ethan became more present. He hovered longer in doorways. His hugs lingered an extra beat. When we passed each other in the hallway, he didn't just walk by, he brushed by, fingers trailing my arm like it was an accident, but it wasn't. And when I was in the kitchen back turned, chopping vegetables, minding my own business, I felt his eyes on me. Not glancing. Not noticing. Watching. I turned around once, catching him mid-stare. His gaze didn't dart away like it used to when he was a shy teenager. He held it. And for the briefest second, so did I. I told myself to stop. To say something. To pull away. But instead, I smiled. Tight-lipped, nervous, pretending I didn't feel the heat crawl up the back of my neck. That night, I stood at the sink, washing dishes. The kitchen was dim except for the soft under-cabinet lights. Rain tapped the window again, familiar now, almost comforting. Almost. Ethan walked up behind me. I felt him before I saw him. The way his presence filled the room. The warmth of him standing too close. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Gentle. Steady. But he didn't pull away. Not right away. And when I turned to face him, his expression was unreadable. Vulnerable, yes. But also bold. Like he had made up his mind about something. His voice was low, careful. I've been thinking about what I said the other night. I swallowed hard. I wanted to stop him. I should have. But instead I nodded. He continued. I didn't say it to scare you. I see how you look at me sometimes. And I can't help but wonder if maybe you feel it too. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him this was wrong, that he didn't understand what he was doing. But then he said something that shook me. I don't see you as just my mom. I see you as you. A woman. A beautiful woman who's been alone for too long. I trust you more than anyone. I don't want to learn from strangers. I want to feel safe. With someone who loves me. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I stepped back, finally, tried to laugh it off. Ethan, you're confused. You're young. You don't really know what you're saying. He shook his head. I know exactly what I'm saying. And the scariest part? He did. There was no doubt in his eyes. No hesitation in his voice. Only honesty. And longing. And a kind of pain I recognized all too well. Because I'd felt it too. That ache to be understood. Touched. Seen. Not as a title. Not as a role. But as a person. Still, I told him he was being inappropriate. That I couldn't have this conversation with him. That he was my son. But when he reached out and took my hand, I didn't pull away. Not right away. I let his fingers wrap around mine. Let the heat of his skin seep into my palm like an old memory I didn't want to forget. He looked into my eyes, so deeply, so earnestly, and asked, "Just teach me. Please. I trust you." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I should have screamed. I should have said no. But all I did was close my eyes. It happened quietly. There was no loud declaration, no storm of passion or rage. Just stillness. A kind of stillness that only comes before everything changes. The bedroom was dim. Only the hallway light crept in through the crack in the door, painting a soft orange line across the floorboards. I was sitting at the edge of the bed, knees drawn up close, arms wrapped around myself like armor that no longer worked. My heart was pounding. Not fast. Just steady. Heavy. Each beat a warning I refused to hear. And then I heard his footsteps. Slow. Careful. Like he wasn't sure if he should be walking toward me at all. He appeared in the doorway, his shadow stretching across the room before he stepped into the soft glow of the hallway light. Ethan. He looked different. Still my son. Still the boy I raised. But also, somehow not. There was a tremble in his hands, but not in his eyes. He wasn't rushing. He was just standing there, waiting for permission to exist in this space with me. We didn't speak right away. The silence between us was thick, alive. Not awkward, not forced. Just full. Like both of us already knew what the words would be, and neither of us wanted to say them first. Finally, I whispered, "You shouldn't be here." He nodded, but he didn't leave. I looked down at my hands, dry, tired, worn from years of cooking meals, folding laundry, wiping tears. Hands that had been used for mothering. Not for this. And still, I didn't move. I heard him step closer. Just once. And then stop again. Another long pause. Then, softly, "I'm scared too." That broke something in me. Because he wasn't bold anymore. He wasn't daring. He was afraid. Just like me. I looked up at him. Really looked. This wasn't a game. It wasn't lust or rebellion. It was longing. His eyes were pleading, not for touch, but for connection. And then I said it. Words I never thought I'd speak. "If we do this, we can never go back." The weight of those words hung in the air like smoke. Thick. Suffocating. He took one more step. Reached for my hand. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. His fingers brushed against mine, and I let them stay there. We sat in the quiet for what felt like hours. Hands together. Breaths shallow. No more words. Because there was nothing left to say. When our lips touched, it wasn't fire. It was grief. Grief for the years lost. Grief for the roles we were about to shatter. Grief for the mother and son we'd once been. His touch was gentle, careful, and devastating. I didn't feel shame in that moment. Only sorrow. And something else I hadn't felt in years. Presence. Not fantasy. Not escape. Just two souls, starved. Finding something forbidden in a space that had grown too quiet for too long. Fade to black. Just soft breathing. The kind that trembles between want and regret. And then a sound. A quiet sob. Mine. Because in that moment, I wasn't his mother. I was just a woman. And he was the first one who saw me that way. After years of being invisible. The light was different. No more orange hallway glow. Just the pale gray of dawn spilling through the curtains. I reached for the other side of the bed. It was cold. Empty. I sat up slowly, heart heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. The room was too quiet. Even the birds outside seemed to hold back their songs. I slipped out of bed, pulling on my robe, still numb from what had happened. I walked down the hall, calling his name softly, "Ethan." No answer. I checked his room. The door was ajar. The bed neatly made. His backpack was gone. No note. No sound. Just absence. He was gone. And that's when the panic set in. The guilt. The fear. The echoes of everything we didn't say. I sat on the floor beside his bed, knees pulled to my chest, and whispered the question that would haunt me for the rest of my life. What have I done? I found the note tucked under the ceramic bowl on the kitchen table. The bowl still had a single banana in it, browning at the edges, one of those little, familiar things you don't notice until the world shifts and suddenly everything becomes a symbol. The note was folded twice, plain white paper. No envelope. Just sitting there waiting. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, heart already pounding, throat dry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ruin us. 9 words. That's all. But those 9 words felt like a hammer to the chest. Ruin us. As if we were something whole to begin with. As if what happened that night shattered whatever fragile thread had held us together. I pressed the paper to my chest and sank into the kitchen chair, staring out the window. The rain was gone now. The sky was clear. But inside me, it was storming. I thought maybe he just needed time. Maybe he'd come home after school, drop his backpack at the door like always, and sit beside me like nothing happened. But he didn't. Not that day. Not the next. Not the one after that. He came home late. When he thought I was asleep. And in the mornings, he left early. Before I could catch a glimpse of his eyes, he moved like a ghost through the house, silent, swift, unreachable. The sound of the front door opening and closing became torture. Every time I heard that creak, my heart jumped. I'd walk into the hallway, hopeful, only to find the door swinging shut behind him, or the silence swallowing his exit. I kept cooking dinner, kept setting the table for 2, lighting the candle like I always did, folding the napkins, pouring water into 2 glasses, but he never came. And I couldn't bring myself to clear his place. I left it, like a shrine, like a memory I wasn't ready to erase. I'd sit across from the empty chair, chewing food I couldn't taste, blinking back tears I didn't want to cry. Because crying felt like admitting it really happened. That we really crossed the line. And that the line was drawn in permanent ink. Some nights, I'd hear him moving in his room, pacing, or maybe just restless. I'd stand outside his door, hand raised, ready to knock. But I never did. What would I say? I'm sorry? It was a mistake? I wanted it too? Every sentence that formed in my mind collapsed under the weight of its own shame. So instead, I started writing. I bought a little notebook from the pharmacy down the road. The cover was soft blue, with gold-edged pages. And I filled it. Not with explanations. Not with excuses. Just moments. Moments I didn't want to forget. Moments I wished I could erase. Moments that kept me awake at night. I wrote about the way his eyes looked when he said he trusted me. About the warmth of his hand. The silence of the morning after. The sound of the door that never quite shut all the way. And I wrote about the ache. The ache of being needed and then rejected. Because I didn't just lose Ethan as a son. I lost him as my person. The one I leaned on. The one I shared meals with. The one who made the house feel less empty. Now the house echoed. Every room. And even when he was here, he wasn't. He moved around me like I was made of glass. Fragile. Dangerous. Better left untouched. And I hated myself for missing him, in that way. But the hardest part? The thing that gutted me more than anything? Was knowing that I was no longer his safe place. I used to be the one he ran to. Now I'm the reason he runs away. Some days I think I'm starting to move on. Others, I realize I'm still stuck in that moment, frozen in time, in thought, in guilt. I walk now, every morning, through the park near our house. It's small, nothing special. A looping path, a few benches, some scattered trees that rustle in the breeze like they're whispering to each other. There's something about watching the world continue on, unbothered, unbroken, while you're standing still inside, that's both comforting and cruel. I see mothers with their sons here all the time. Little boys chasing ducks. Teenagers throwing footballs. Even grown men walking slowly with their mothers, talking about jobs or girlfriends or weekend plans. And every time I pass them, something tightens in my chest. A quiet envy. A deep, hollow regret. Because I didn't just lose Ethan as my child. I lost him in a way that most people couldn't understand. Wouldn't want to understand. And worse? I still don't know if I regret what happened, or if I just regret the silence that followed. I keep asking myself, did I fail him? As a mother? As a guide? As a woman? Did I fail myself? Or was this just what happens when two wounded people lean too hard on each other for too long? I don't have the answers. No one teaches you how to carry this kind of shame. There are no rules for what happens when loneliness and love wear the same mask. When comfort becomes closeness and closeness becomes something far more dangerous. When the lines between need and want blur so slowly, you don't realize you've crossed them until it's too late. I think back to that night. Not just what we did, but what it meant. For him. For me. It wasn't passion. Not in the way people think. It was two people who had been abandoned. Who had poured so much into each other that we forgot where he ended and I began. And I wonder, if I had pulled away the moment he reached for me, would we still be okay? Would he still look me in the eye without flinching? Would he still call me mom with softness, not guilt? Or was this always going to happen? A slow-motion car crash I kept telling myself I could avoid, right up until the impact. And the silence afterward. God, the silence. That's what haunts me the most. Not just his silence, but mine. Because I didn't tell anyone. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I sat with it. Let it steep. Let it grow. And now I carry it like a stone in my chest, heavy, unmovable, cold. People talk about mistakes as if they're singular events. Quick. Fleeting. A decision you can rewind or rewrite. But some mistakes aren't events. They're echoes. They stretch across days, across years, shaping every breath, every step that comes after. And I wonder, was what happened between us an act of betrayal? Or was it a cry for love, answered too fully? Is it wrong to need someone that much? To want to be touched, held, seen, after years of being invisible? Does need justify anything? No. Maybe. I don't know. What I do know is this. There's a bench in that park I always stop at, under an old oak tree that leans just slightly to the left, like it's listening. And I sit there. And I watch the people pass. And I wait for him. Not to come back. Not really. But to forgive me. And, maybe, one day, for me to forgive myself. I've never told anyone this. Not a friend. Not a therapist. Not even in prayer. Just you. You, who've sat with me through every pause, every breath, every word I didn't know I needed to say. And now I have to ask, what would you have done? Have you ever loved someone so deeply that the lines blurred before you even realized they existed? Have you ever crossed a boundary so faint, so quiet, so heartbreakingly human, that by the time you noticed it was there, it had already disappeared behind you? People will judge. They always do. They'll call it disgusting. They'll call me disgusting. But they won't see the nights I cried myself to sleep. Or the way his absence now echoes louder than his footsteps ever did. They won't understand that I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for understanding. I'm asking if anyone out there knows what it's like to be so desperately needed that you forget you're not supposed to say yes. So I'm opening the door I've kept shut for years. Please, share your thoughts in the comments. Not just to judge, though I know some will. But maybe, to confess. To relate. To connect. Because if even one person out there says, I understand, then maybe this wasn't just a mistake. Maybe it was a mirror. Held up to the darkest corners of what it means to be human. And if this story stirred something in you, if it left you questioning or grieving or remembering, then subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, where secrets are whispered, hearts are broken, and stories never leave you the same. Because you never know what someone's hiding behind their quiet eyes until they decide to speak. It's been 3 years now. The house looks different. The walls have been repainted. The furniture rearranged. Even the curtains are new. But the silence? That stayed. I sit by the window most afternoons. A cup of tea, a soft blanket over my lap. I'm older now. Not just in years, but in soul. There's a kind of aging that happens when you carry something unspeakable. A kind of withering on the inside. On the shelf beside me, there's a new photo of Ethan. He's smiling, strong, confident. Standing next to a woman his age. She's beautiful. They look happy. And they should be. He doesn't call much. A few texts here and there. Polite, distant. But in that photo, I see something I haven't seen in a long time. Peace. And that has to be enough. Because some stories don't end in hugs and apologies. Some don't end in healing. Some stories don't end in forgiveness. Some end in silence. But silence. Silence tells its own tale. And if you listen closely, sometimes it says more than words ever could.